Hello and welcome to another video from me, Rough Swordsman, Wargamer. Today we're having a look at a game that isn't actually released yet and is due to go on Kickstarter at the time of this recording, sometime in October 2023. And the game is the Battle of Khalkhin Gor, battle between the Soviets and Japan between July and August 1939. Now, as it hasn't been released yet, this is in fact a prototype copy kindly sent to me by the publishers Princeps Games, who you may be familiar with my earlier video of their game Freezing Inferno. So instead of doing a sort of traditional unboxing, because it's still in its prototype version, we'll have a look at the components and a look at the rules and give you some idea, I hope, of how this game is actually played. So let's open the box. So we'll have a look at the map first, and just like Freezing Inferno, it's a double-sided map, so you can choose which one you prefer. This one, I'm not sure if this is the final version that's going to be in the retail copy, but as you can see, the terrain is very easy to distinguish. But I think we'll have a look at the other side, which is a bit more colourful. Here's the other side of the map, much more colourful. Again, not sure if this is the final version, but the only problem for me is it's rather large and comes off the edge of my table and is in fact in two pieces. So that's something to bear in mind, and we'll have a look around this map in a moment. Now, the rules of the game are still being worked on, I assume, because they sent me a PDF to print out, which it looks like they're still working on. For instance, the solo mode hasn't been finalized yet, so that's not in these prototype rules. So here we can see the Khalkhin Gor River separating the two sides. We've got the Soviets on this side and the Japanese on this side. So a game for two players, one playing, of course, the USSR, the other the Japanese. And as I mentioned just now, there will be a solo mode included in the final product. Now, there are three victory conditions. The first is that for the Soviets to win, they must occupy 5 of these white checkpoints, they're called. There are 9 of those altogether on the Japanese side, while still holding 4 out of 6 of their checkpoints. If this isn't achieved by the end of the game, the winner is the player that controls Japan. Another way to win for the Soviets is to take control right up here of this base in Nomonhan and hold it until the beginning of their next turn. And lastly, the Japanese player, if they take control right down here of Tamsak Bulak, they immediately win the game if they can hold it until their next turn. Now you can see these checkpoints have numbers by them, and this is their political points worth. Again, I know I keep referring to the previous game, Freezing Inferno. They were cities, and those points were like military points. Same sort of thing here, but they're called checkpoints. And the points with which you are going to be reinforcing or replenishing your units is represented on the left-hand side over here with a track that goes all the way down to the bottom and halfway along the bottom edge. You can see some are red. These checkpoints are in undisputed Soviet territory, and for the Japanese there are 2 yellow checkpoints, and this is undisputed Japanese territory. However, these white checkpoints, which, as I've just mentioned, the Soviets have to capture 5 of, are disputed territory. So that's what they're fighting over. Here's a close-up of the map showing you some of the different terrain, which is explained on one of those heavy-duty cardboard player aids, which you saw in the other game. And also on this player aid, we've got a list of abbreviations that are used in the rules. And the attack modifiers, which only occur with two types of terrain, the high grass and the river fords here. This river here, which is smaller, the Holston River, can be crossed. However, the Khalkhin Gor River can only be crossed at a couple of ford points on the map, or if either side builds a bridge. And there are a couple of those for each player, which you'll place across the river. Those two spaces have to be wetlands. That will allow you to cross. Also on this player aid are the unit characteristics with their attack, defense, move and range values. So I tell you what, let's have a look at the counters. So pretty straightforward counters. And again, if you've seen Freezing Inferno, these are virtually the same. So I assume this is how they're going to look. So we've got fighters, bombers, anti-aircraft for both sides, which are used in a different way for this game. But we also have cavalry, infantry, tanks, artillery, and HQs, or generals. And again, very easy to understand. On the top left here, we've got the attack value, and on the right, the defense value. And we'll have a look at how the combat is resolved. And down the bottom, we've got its movement points. And the artillery also has a range of 4 hexes. Next, we'll have a look at the air battle system used in the game. And this is very different from the one used in Freezing Inferno, which was a more sort of zoomed out battle. And the distance between the airports was much greater. Whereas in this game, we're zoomed in much more. So the designers decided it would be a bit daft to use flying to airport, as it was only a short distance. So they've revamped it into this air battle system. Each side gets one of these cards, which shows the current strength of the airbase, the number of bombers and fighters available, the number of anti-aircraft units available at the start of the game, and the combat result table for air attacks. Each player also has a set of 9 cards which they're going to use and place down to see who gets air superiority. So the airbase strength determines how many aircraft that base can hold. So for each strength, the player can have 5 aircraft. So at the start, both air bases are at strength 7 and can therefore hold up to 35 aircraft. So at the start of the air phase, each player calculates their air strength, and this is done by adding their airbase strength to the amount of fighters they have, and at the start each player has 14. So for instance, if we had the Soviets down at 6, we would add their strength to the number of fighters they have, and if they had lost aircraft and were down to 13, we would add those two numbers together, which totals 19, of course. And this is then the column they will use. And for the Japanese, they're at full strength at 14 and 7, which is 21. So they will use this column, slightly better column. Now players roll a die, and the winner is the first player and will have the first player token. And that gives that player an advantage, which you'll see in a moment. So having decided which column we're going to use, players then choose one of their air battle cards and they place it face down next to their airbase strength board. So for example, Japanese place their card and the Soviets play their card. Then they're revealed simultaneously, so 6 for the Soviets, 4 for the Japanese. This determines the row they use. So for the Soviets, row 6 along to the 19 gives them a total of 11. And for the Japanese, they're on row 4 and they were at 21 and they get a 10. So at this point, the Soviets are winning with their air superiority. However, now the players can decide to play an extra air battle card, and the player with that first player token chooses first. So let's say that the Soviets won the first player token. They can decide now to play an extra air battle card, and then that choice will be given to the Japanese. Once they have played their extra battle card, that's it. They can't play another one for the game. So they could choose not to play, they could choose to play. That's their extra card gone, or they could both decide to pass, or they can both decide to play. In this example, let's say that the Soviets, who have first choice, decide to pass. The Japanese get the option now to play another card, and this card is played and revealed immediately, and that 3 is added to the total they got, which was 10. So they now have 13, and the Soviets still have 11. So the Japanese win air superiority. You can see there's a little bit of strategy there. You can hold back your extra card to play because now the Japanese player has less air battle cards to play with. So that's how air superiority is worked out, but what can you do with it? One of the options is that the winning player will gain a +1 attack modifier for 1 ground battle in that round. But bear in mind, this is only available in round 2, but it will give a +1 to any battle in any terrain that you wish. The next thing they could do is use their bombers to attack the enemy airbase. Each side has 3 anti-aircraft units. And the player decides how they're going to be distributed amongst airbase defending or supply line defending, as we'll see in a moment. However, at the start of the game, all 3 anti-aircraft have to defend for the first round their air bases, after which you can move these about between these 2. So how do we attack air bases? We see how many bombers the attacking player has. So for instance, we'll have the Soviets attack the Japanese airbase, and we'll say they have 11 bombers. So their strength is 11. The Japanese, we'll say, has an air strength of 6, and they have 3 anti-aircraft defending. So we add that to the 6, their strength, to give 9, of course. So the strength ratio is Soviets 11, Japanese 9. Now the Japanese will fire their anti-aircraft at the 11 bombers coming in. 3 anti-aircraft unit, 3 dice rolls. If they roll a 1 or a 2, one of the bombers has been hit, so a maximum of 3 could be hit, but we'll say for this example that they were unsuccessful. So the strength attacking the Japanese is 11, and the defending strength is their airbase strength plus how many units are defending. So in this case, 6 plus 3 is 9. So the Soviets will be using this column, and the Japanese using the 9 column. Each side then rolls a die and cross-references that with the die roll number. So for example, we'll say the Soviets roll a 6, and on the 11 they get a 6, and the Japanese roll a 4, they're on the 9, and they get a 3. So the Soviets have succeeded in their attack, and because of that, the Japanese air base strength is reduced. The number of aircraft they can have is reduced as well. If it's a draw or the defenders win, nothing happens and the attack is over. So that's using bombers to attack enemy air bases. Last thing the player who has won air superiority can do is attack the enemy supply lines, but once again, only from round 2. So once again, we've got our anti-aircraft. We can distribute them how we wish at the end of that round. And then the attacking player once again sees how many bombers they have. That's their air strength. How many anti-aircraft are defending. A die is rolled. And once again, on a result of 1 or 2, one of those bombers is destroyed. And again, we'll say that the Soviets were unsuccessful. And in this example, we'll use 12. So they'll use the 12 column for their results. The Soviets will then roll another die to look up which row to use. But that depends on the round the game is at. So in rounds 1 to 3, you can see hopefully that these 4 rows are highlighted. Rounds 4 to 6, it's these 4, and rounds 7 to 8, these 4. So if we're in rounds 4 to 6, for instance, a roll of 1 or 2 means we'll use this row, 3 to 4, this row, 5 to 6, this row, and 7 to 8, this row. Once we cross-reference it, say for instance, we're using this row 4 in round 5, and we've got 12. We get the 5. Now, for this option, you then double that number, so it's 10, and that is how many political points the defending player loses. So that can have a drastic event on how many points or money that person has got to buy reinforcements and the like. So there we are. The only other thing is there is an optional rule, and you can use these airstrike cards, and they're used after air superiority is determined. And if you're attacking an enemy's air base or enemy supply line, the players can choose to use one of these cards, which have various things that can happen. But as I say, that's optional. So there we are. That's the air battle rules. Zones of control, pretty straightforward. They're sort of sticky. So, for instance, if a stack of units moves in, they have to stop and can either battle with the adjacent unit or do nothing. In the next turn, they can move away or move into another zone of control. But if they do that, of course, they have to stop again. So pretty straightforward. And unit supply, again, pretty straightforward. Generals, and you'll see there are 3 types of generals or HQs. Your unit has to be a maximum of 6 hexes from that general. So infantry unit has to be a maximum of 6 hexes from the infantry HQ or general. Oh, there are quite severe penalties for not being in supply. Units have their movement halved, as well as their total attack and total defense value halved. So it's prudent to be in supply all the time. Occupying a checkpoint is pretty easy. You just move into that. However, this does affect the political points. The side that has lost the control point, in this case the Soviets, would lose 3 points, and the Japanese would gain an extra 1. So less points for the Soviets to spend next time. Now, hidden setup, if you're playing 2 players, is done via 2 mini-maps. And these lines here represent the river, and it's like these have been pulled apart to show the west side of Khalkhin Gor River and the east side. Now again, I think I'm interpreting this correctly. The Soviet player will use this map and mark on here where his units are. The Japanese will use this map and mark out where their units are, as well as those that are dug in and hidden. Now assume this is for the Soviets and this is for the Japanese, because in the rules it says you can't place units within 3 hexes of the river, and the Soviet player places their units west while the Japanese player places their units east from the Khalkhin Gor River. So that's how I read it. So when the game starts, the Soviet player reveals his map and places his units. I think there has to be a bit of trust, because then the Japanese player will place his units, which aren't hidden, and then folds the map up so the other player can't see where the dug-in units are. Bear in mind that you can only have up to 3 units which can dig in, marked on this map here, and they can only be placed on clear ground, which is this stuff, or wetlands, which is this stuff, without any roads on them. And hidden units can be placed on these wetland areas as long as it's not adjacent. This is a sort of exception to the 3 hex rule that applies to normal units. The dug-in units must be revealed at the start of round 5, or when the weather conditions are such that they are forced to do so. We'll have a look at that in a moment. And when an enemy unit moves into a hex with a dug-in unit. Next, we'll have a look at combat. So, as I mentioned earlier, combat occurs when a unit moves adjacent to an enemy unit. And remember, a unit is a stack normally. The maximum stacking value is 5 units. And if the stacking value gets reduced, of course, to 0, they are eliminated. And you have to wait until the reinforcements replenishments phase to bring some more back on. But combat is pretty straightforward. What we'll do is we'll add the total attack strength of the attacker, compare it with the total defense value of the defender, and look that up on the old combat results table. So for this one, we've got 5 units. Each have a value, attacking value of 2. So it's 2 plus the 5 gives us 7. And for the defenders, we've only got 3, but they have a defensive value of 3. So 3 plus 3 is 6. So the ratio is 7 to 6. And fear not, we don't have to simplify it, cancel it down. We go bang, there it is, 7 to 6. And then we roll a die and look up on the 7 to 6 column what happens to the combatants. And those results are summarized along with the other abbreviations for the game. So for instance, we won't get it on this column. We get the AE result. That of course means attacker eliminated or defender eliminated. DR, defender retreats. However, there are some with the defender retreats in brackets with a 1. That means you lose 1 strength, one of these units, and you have the option to retreat. And as in a few games that I've played, you have this slash between the 2 results. The first one is, of course, the attacker's result. and the one after the slash is the defender's result. So pretty straightforward. While we're talking about throwing dice, there are some dice, of course, included. We've got a D8, D10, a D12, and 2 D20s. These D20s have been altered, and I think I got it a little bit wrong in the other game where this is the same. They're not the same dice. They both go up from 1 to 8, but one of them you have a 10% chance to get 1, 2, 7, or 8, but a 15% chance to get 3, 4, 5, or 6. Whereas the other one, again, goes from 1 to 8, but only a 5% chance to get a 1 or 8, a 10% chance to get a 2 or 7, 15% to get a 3 or 6, and a 20% to get 4 or 5. In other words, you're adjusting your luck. So if you don't want to use a die where the probability is equal across all the numbers, you can use these because the strength of the unit will have more impact on the result rather than the die roll, and will stop you getting sort of rubbishy 1s or brilliant 8s. But you have to make a choice of which die to use, and once you've made your choice, you can't change it for the rest of the game. Next, there are 2 sets of 9 cards, each of general cards. And these, if you look at the Japanese, you can see we've got the numbered, and we've got infantry. We've got 3 of those. We've got 3 for tank general and 3 for an artillery general. I'm not sure if these blanks will be in the final product or they just haven't finalized the picture yet. And it's the same for the Russians. We've got artillery generals, 3 of those, tanks, and infantry. So what you would do is pick a general for each of your types of units. 1 for your artillery, 1 for your infantry, 1 for your tanks. And as you can see, they've got numbers by them. And yes, you're right, the higher the number, the better. But each one of those generals total cannot be more than 9. So you'd have to have a 4, a 3, and a 2, for instance. And you do the same for the Soviets. And as I said, the higher the number, the better, because this number is the lowest you could throw. So if you threw a 2 and you were using the tank general, it would be classed as a 3. If you threw a 1 with the infantry general with a 4, that would be a 4. So you can see choosing those requires a little bit of thought, and they are represented by this unit, which has the number 4 on it, and it's placed on 1 stack of those type of units. That's the general. That is also the supply point for the rest of your infantry. But every time this unit attacks, it can't throw less than 4. So that's the generals. Also are these cards. Now these may look familiar from Freezing Inferno. You've got them numbered 1 to 8 to represent the 8 phases of the game. There are 3 in each set. So when you're setting up the game, you would take the groups of 3, give them a shuffle, choose 1, put the rest away, and do that for the other phases. And then at the start of that phase, you would turn it over and something will happen. A little bit of background here, the date it happens, and for this particular card, crossing the river ford for Japanese units costs 0 movement points. It would normally cost 2. So there we go, saving a few points there. And that applies during the whole phase until, in this case, phase 2, where you'll discard that and draw the next one. As I said earlier, during phases 3, 5, 7 and 8, you can spend your political points, and to keep track of those, they aren't in the prototype, but they will be in the finished product. You've got these sort of money tokens, because when you get to one of these, you'll see how many points you've got. Take the requisite amount of money, if you like, and use as much or as little as you wish. You can replenish damaged units or make completely new ones. And the cost of doing that is on this chart here. And I think this may well be changed, because it says in the rules the cost of units depends on which module you're using as an add-on. If you've watched Freezing Inferno, you'll see there's some modules that you can clip on to the basic game. And if you're using certain of those modules, the cost of units changes. But for now, they've only got the one price. So if you want to replenish a damaged unit, remember the stacking limit is 5. That gives you the cost, and those can be placed straight away on the board at the beginning of their turn. Whereas new units, if you decide to build a completely new stack of units, once again, the cost is the same, but there is an admin fee of 2 extra political points to do that. These are placed off board and then placed onto the board at the end of that player's turn. So in both cases, replenished and reinforced units can only be placed on the board if you have an HQ, I assume, of that type. The newly formed units are placed on the board in one of the hexes next to a hex where the HQ is located. And of course, the replenished units will go on the unit that's being replenished as long as there is an HQ of that type. If you haven't got an HQ, you can of course buy one, and you have to place it on a checkpoint that you control. So if you haven't got any checkpoints you control, you can't buy an HQ. If you haven't got an HQ, you can't do any reinforcements or replenishments. So that's that. Next, we'll have a look at these modules. There are only a couple of modules in this game, one of which is the weather. I believe it begins clear, and then at the start of every phase, you'll roll a 12-sider, and that will tell you what the weather's doing. So once again, there will be some sort of cubes or something to remind you what the weather's doing. In this case, for wind, the bomber accuracy is reduced. A -1 modifier is applied. So that's pretty straightforward, and I can't see any reason why you wouldn't add that on as standard. The next one's to do with espionage and deception. Each player has these tactical improvements available, and you can see they're asymmetric. And what you're trying to do is move these markers up as high as you wish. You've got to get at least to this level, and the cost of moving up those markers is 2 political points. Once you've reached this sort of threshold, you can throw a die, and that will, if you're successful, enable you to use those tactical improvements. Now, the higher you want to go and the more you wish to spend in political points means that when you are ready to have a go at the reward, the die roll needed is less. So it'll take more time and of course cost more points, which will then mean you can't buy as many units to get the reward. Here on the PDF rules we can see that if it's in column 3 you have to throw less than a 4, but the higher up it goes, the easier it gets. Also, the higher up it gets, the more reward you will get, because the more counters you get to do that improvement. So for espionage and deception, depending on what field they have a go at when they throw their die, incidentally, if you fail, that moves back to the start. This is how many of those markers you can pick up. So the higher you get, the more markers you get. The espionage markers can be cashed in to let you rethrow a bad roll, or indeed the opponent re-roll a good roll. And the deceptions can be cashed in to enable you to withdraw a unit before combat, before the battle. The attacking unit does move in to your hex, but it means you can get out of dodge if it's a little bit one-sided. So that's the modules. And just one last thing. On one of the player aids, we've got the complete breakdown of the sort of sequence of play, if you like, for when you're setting up. Round one, what you do, and for the remainder of the other rounds. So everything is sort of broken down for you. And that's it. That's a look at Princeps' brand new game, the Battle of Khalkhin Gor, soon to be, or is at the moment, or has been, depending on when you watch this, on Kickstarter. I'll leave a link for that in the description so you can go and check it out. And if it hasn't started, click the button to be notified when it does. Oh, I nearly forgot. Just like the other game, we've got these nifty little storage boxes which can be taken out at the bottom of the box to store all your player aids and counters, dice, and the like. And there we are. So this has been not my standard unboxing, but a look through the components and a look through the rules of Princeps' brand new game, the Battle of Khalkhin Gor, a prototype that's due to be on, at the time of videoing anyway, on Kickstarter sometime this month. And as I say, I will leave a link for that for you to go and check it out or bookmark it. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope me going through the rules has given you a good idea of how the game actually works and has given you enough info for you to know if it's tickled your fancy to go and check it out. If you did enjoy it and you haven't done so already, it would be great if you would consider subscribing to the channel. It really does help. Pushing the like button of the video, the thumbs up, helps tremendously. And if you want to be informed of other content the channel uploads, then push that bell. But make sure you push all notifications. Leave a comment. This looks an interesting, not too difficult game, so maybe a good game to introduce a new person into wargaming. And as I said at the start, the solo part of this hasn't been finalized yet, but that's something to bear in mind as well. My only issue with it is the size of the maps because of my little tables. But that might not be an issue for you, but let me know. What do you think about the game? Put a comment down there because, as you know, I love to read them. Thanks as always to my subscribers. Thank you so much. And just before I go, if you wish to support the channel a little bit further, well, now you can. You can buy the channel a coffee, and I'll leave a link in the description for that. Or you can push the super thanks button underneath the video. It's not obligatory, of course, but if you decide to do that, it just helps the channel to keep ticking along. So thank you. Right then, I'll hopefully see you in the next video. But until then, as always, you take care and goodbye.